Hey everybody, welcome to the channel, Michael Noland, and tonight I start my brand new series, The Led Zeppelin Story. But as I said in past videos, this isn't just going to be a chronological covering of Led Zeppelin. I'm going to do it a little bit different. You see, when I hear Led Zeppelin, I hear music that transcends the power of even Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, or John Bonham. This, of course, was accomplished by many factors with the band, only one of which I'm going to be discussing tonight, and that has to do with Led Zeppelin being an entity that is far more than just those four members, and yet would never have been born without Jimmy Page. All right, so what do I mean about Led Zeppelin being an entity waiting to be born? Well, we know that Led Zeppelin was officially born in the year 1968. All right, so at this point, we have to go back 2 years prior to May 16th, 1966. Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck are both still in the Yardbirds. Keith Moon and John Entwistle are in The Who, but both of them are extremely unhappy with the group dynamics and are both looking for an out. In the Yardbirds, Jeff Beck is getting more and more frustrated. The Yardbirds manager at this point is looking actively for side projects for Jeff Beck to be involved with so that he wasn't as frustrated as he was with some of the more basic approaches of the Yardbirds at this point. Now, Jimmy Page was right in Jeff Beck's corner as far as being frustrated that the Yardbirds just seemed bound and determined to be a pop rock act as opposed to the rock band that both Page and Beck wanted them to be. So it's on this night that Jeff Beck, along with Jimmy Page, with John Paul Jones, if you can believe it, Nicky Hopkins, and The Who's drummer Keith Moon set out to record Beck's Bolero. Now, the whole session resulted from a visit from Jeff Beck to Jimmy Page's place. Jeff Beck always loved playing with Jimmy. He said that they both loved to go off the deep end a bit, and so he dropped by and Page was playing a bolero, and they started working on that bolero from that point on. Now, over the years, there has been a major disagreement between Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page as far as who wrote this piece of music. Now, since it was already based on a bolero that pre-existed, you kind of got to wonder if either one of them did a whole lot of original writing on this piece to begin with. And we're going to get into that. That's going to actually be part 2 in this series. And my upcoming video will address to the degree that Jimmy Page and company stole material from some of the older blues artists and inappropriately claimed writing credit. We're going to talk about that whole thing in my next video. But basically, Beck says, look, I do all the slide work. I basically created what would be the piece's melody. I wrote it. Jimmy Page, on the other hand, says he did all of the chordal arrangements, all of the playing of all other guitars, and that he wrote it from the outset. And you know, when I listen to this piece, I think they both should take partial writing credit and share it with the original Bolero, if you ask me. Now, here's another thing about this set of recordings. The manager to the Yardbirds has always claimed that he was the producer on this recording. Jimmy Page vehemently disagrees and said that he was pretty much left to his own devices. And you know what? I think Jimmy Page is spot on here. Even the manager of the Yardbirds admitted that after the session was done, he pretty much left Jimmy to his own devices. But you know, the results of this recording and the history that led up to these recordings really set into motion an almost pre-birth to the magnificent Led Zeppelin. You see, both Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck had been on their own talking to at least Keith Moon, with Beck probably having some conversations with John Entwistle. Both of them knew that Moon especially, but even John Entwistle, was unhappy with The Who, and they were both looking for a project in which they could sink their teeth into. Now, for this recording session, one source even says that John Entwistle was invited but didn't show up. But irregardless, on Beck's Bolero, we have Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, Keith Moon, and Nicky Hopkins on record. All of the musicians were extremely excited with the results. Jimmy and Jeff both wanting to be in a band that was much harder edged than the Yardbirds. There was discussion during these recordings and shortly after for a short period of time about this group of individuals getting together. In fact, it was during these recording sessions that Keith Moon nervously laughed that if they did create a band, it would probably go over like a Led Zeppelin. Now, I know there are sources that say this comes from John Entwistle, but Jimmy Page has always remembered that it was Keith Moon that said this at these sessions, and that idea just stuck in his head forever. In the days following, there were discussions amongst these guys about actually forming a band. Now, at this point, John Paul Jones, even though he's on this recording, wasn't really being considered, and I think it's because they really wanted Keith Moon. Jimmy Page was already looking for a Bonham, and he didn't know it. And if John Entwistle came along with Keith Moon, bonus, this guy was one of the preeminent bass players in rock and had a name. Now, John Paul Jones wasn't being ignored during these sessions. As a matter of fact, he would be asked to arrange strings for a further Yardbirds recording and actually play on one of their cuts as well. No, I think Beck and Page were just reading the lay of the land, and who could argue with John Entwistle being the basis of that particular lineup? Now, as to whether Nicky Hopkins would have been a member of this band is debatable. There was talk of him, but you almost have to wonder whether he would have accepted a membership into this band, since he enjoyed that status as an extra special session player, right? But I do know there was talk between Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page over the next few days to a week about possible vocalists, and the name Steve Marriott came up several times. Both of the guitarists were excited about putting him up front with the two of them handling most of the guitar parts. So there you have it. You have a magnificent recording, a pre-Zeppelin sound, a pre-Zeppelin approach, the name Led Zeppelin, some of the finest musicians you could ask to be in any rock band on the planet, considering the damn name. Who knows what could have happened if this idea had been given time to germinate. But it wouldn't be too much longer after those first few heady days after the May 16th recording session where Jimmy and Jeff were back on the road with the Yardbirds, and Keith Moon and John Entwistle were back on tour with The Who. This took the gas out of the idea temporarily. Jeff Beck continued on with this sound, and to my ears, he's almost pre-Zeppelin during this time period himself. But to Jimmy Page, this idea would never go away. In these sessions, he was able to write, to play, to produce, to direct other musicians, to carve a sound. Sound familiar? That's exactly what he would do to perfection with Led Zeppelin. And the drumming, he wouldn't forget the drumming. He needed a drummer at least as good as Keith Moon. He had tasted the forbidden fruit. He would never forget it. But at this point, Jimmy Page knew that at least temporarily, he would have to have total control to get this idea, this Led Zeppelin, off the ground. And you know what? That's what we're going to talk about in my very next video in this series. Led Zeppelin getting off the ground and what they had to contend with. You know, in the history of rock and roll, there are only two bands that can claim an entire decade. The Beatles owned the 60s. Led Zeppelin owned the 70s, and nobody so far has come after them to take that crown. And it's through this new series that we are going to investigate the Led Zeppelin story through those eyes. You know, it was almost as if the entire industry of rock and roll was subconsciously demanding this band be born. So here's a thought experiment for you guys. Imagine yourselves in an alternative universe where this actually happened. That this band, that this incarnation with Jeff Beck, Nicky Hopkins perhaps, Keith Moon, John Entwistle, Jimmy Page as Led Zeppelin, how big a band do you think they would have been? How long would they have lasted? There's a couple of loose cannons in this lineup, aren't there? What would they have accomplished? And finally, would they have sounded anything like Led Zeppelin? We know that both Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page were already sounding rather pre-Led Zeppelin already. Would those two approaches to guitar continue in one band and yet able to cover the magnificent territory that Jimmy Page was able to do so as a solo guitarist? Okay, so that's it for tonight's video. I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line. You know what? I want to thank everybody who has signed up to the channel. Welcome to the tribe. And for those who haven't yet, it's real easy to do. Just hit that subscribe to the tribe button, hit that top bell notification, and you'll be notified of all my future videos, of course. If you're seeing any names here, those are brand new subscribers. I always include a shout out to them at the end of my videos. A big thank you for joining the tribe. And finally, if you've enjoyed the video tonight, give us a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm better recognize us. And if you know anybody who enjoys this type of content, we always encourage our viewers to share our videos. Who knows? They just might thank you. All right, so that's about it for tonight. I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line, and I'll see you in my next video.